Good afternoon and welcome back to Black Press USA's Fire. Today we have Ben Jealous. Ben Jealous he didn't grow up, but he now serves as the president of People for the American Way. Ben Jealous has spent his professional life at the nexus of social change, media, and emerging technologies. He is a former Democratic nominee for governor of the great state of Maryland, the former national president and CEO of the NAACP, and he is the former executive director of the National Newspaper Publishers Association. And for more than a half a decade, Ben Jealous has been investing in social impact startups. Here to talk all things politics and otherwise is Ben Jealous. Thanks for joining us, Ben Jealous.
Thank you, Brother Brown. It's good to be here.
It's good to have you. And I want to just come right out of the gate because I know one of the things that we wanted to talk to you about for the last couple of weeks is the Postal Service. We know that the Postmaster General had given testimony on Capitol Hill, and we had Congresswoman Yvette Clarke from New York say, when we asked her, should we feel better about the situation after the hearings, and she cautioned, we'll see, is what she said. I want to get your thoughts on that situation. We lost your voice, Ben. There you are.
You guys hear me?
Yes.
All right. I said the Postmaster General has done undeniable harm to the...
We lost you again. I'm sorry. It came in and went back out. We haven't gotten you yet. I'm sure we'll get those small kinks worked out. We have a real pro in Ben Jealous on the other side, so I'm sure we'll get it worked out. We had it worked out for a moment there. We heard the tapping. So while he works on that, among the things that we plan to discuss today with Ben Jealous is, as we just started, the situation with the post office.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
All right. I apologize.
That's okay.
I think the mic battery may have died. All right. Well, hey, it's good to be back. Yeah, the Postmaster General is an undeniable harm. He has removed sorting machines. He has removed blue post boxes, and he has slowed down the delivery of the mail. We asked our members here at People for the American Way and the impact they've had. Thousands of replies very quickly, and they were vets saying that they're Agent Orange survivors, and their cancer medication now arrives routinely late. One vet had to go 4 days without his cancer treatment-related blood thinners multiple times so far. We had a cadet at West Point report that their ballot for the Michigan primary arrived 2 days after the primary was over. And it's that type of impact that both alarms us, people not receiving their medication in time, people having to pay more for their medication because it's delayed, and so they can't get like the discounted meds. They got to run out and sort of buy the first available meds. It can be 3-4 times as much. But it's also the type of impact on democracy itself that really seems to be the motive here. In fact, the president has said as much. The president of the United States has said he is attacking the post office because of this election. And that's terrifying. And that's literally the most traitorous thing I've ever seen a president do.
Yeah, and isn't it interesting that the president himself and the first lady used vote by mail recently in Florida? I mean, what does that say?
and routinely, and so the president's trying to have it both ways. He will say that in Florida everything's great. We have a good Republican governor. Well, president, we got 32 or 33 Republican governors. If you're doing this in a partisan litmus test, it would seem like 2/3 of America would meet your partisan litmus test. Really, what he's trying to do is to excuse himself for being a hypocrite. There is really, the post office is a federal agency. It operates the same way in every state, and vote by mail has been practiced in other states more extensively and better than Florida. That's not a matter of opinion. It's just a matter of fact. The states like Oregon have made it the norm and been reviewed by multiple sources as having a very efficient system. And so, that's the problem here, is that this president really, for reasons of his own personal political survival, has been willing to attack an institution that is literally the lifeblood for a whole lot of people who rely on it for medicine, rely on it for their paychecks. And the fact that he would impact them medically and financially is just unconscionable that he would do this.
We've talked so much about voter suppression and gerrymandering and things that keep the vote down. Speak to the monumental way that this does hurt or contribute to voter suppression.
Well, what this does is it makes it seem like it's difficult to vote. It makes people confused about whether their vote will be counted. It will make the process longer. And so it opens up multiple threats. One is that you'll see that it just discourages people from voting. Oh, it's a problem with the post office. I don't know if it'll be counted. Two, it makes it easier for the president to try to make claims of mischief if he's losing. He is creating chaos because, and he is trying to discourage voting because he's afraid that if you have maximum turnout and a clear outcome, that he won't have a job. Yeah. And it's not speculation. The president has said as much.
Yeah, and Ben Jealous, you have sat in many seats, prominent seats, the NAACP presidency. Obviously, we mentioned the NNPA. Have you seen anything like this administration before?
For me to go back to see anything like this, I have to go back to my early days as a reporter and an editor of the Jackson Advocate in Jackson, Mississippi. Down there, we had a governor named Kirk Fordyce, who was overtly racist. He was a member of the White Citizens Council, which had rebranded himself the Conservative Citizens Council. It was the same folks. He had been at all the same social occasions as David Duke, the Klansman who was in the Virginia legislature the year before he became governor. He was overtly racist in his talk in a way that was considered unseemly. This was the days of the New South. He was the prototype for Donald Trump. He was a litigious businessman who'd made his name challenging a 10% minority set aside in a state that was more than 30% black. And even that guy didn't seek to undermine the basic functioning of our elections in the way that this guy, that the president of the United States, Mr. Trump, has.
Yeah. And how concerned are you, and how concerned should everyone be that the way this presidency, the way that this administration has gone, how it's going to affect future administrations and the thought process of future presidents?
We have seen, by Donald Trump, we have seen an attack on the sanctity of the office of president itself. You can look at the way the protesters have been handled. Past presidents, Lyndon B. Johnson, would send federal troops to protect protesters and their First Amendment rights. And send federal law enforcement for the same purpose. This president has sent both to terrorize protesters, terrorize them in the square right behind the White House, terrorize them in Portland, and in the process, as the mayor of Portland pointed out last night, in the process has stoked up tensions in a way that is not just unbefitting to the office of president, it is unprecedented from the office of president.
Again, we're talking to Ben Jealous, the former NAACP president and the current president of the People for the American Way. Ben, can you tell, for folks who don't know, tell us a little bit about the People for the American Way and the mission?
Sure. We were co-founded by the late Congresswoman Barbara Jordan and Norman Lear. Mr. Lear is now 98. He's a World War II combat vet. He's an entrepreneur. He's probably best known as the creator of The Jeffersons and Facts of Life and All in the Family, the show that made Archie Bunker famous, and Good Times. And what Norman Lear really taught America through his art, through his TV shows, was that families fight because they love each other. And yet in 1981, what he and Barbara Jordan, when they founded People for the American Way, were afraid of was the rise of a certain type of politic that said, you're not a Christian, you're not a person of faith if you don't vote for the most conservative Republican you can. And that notion that people's vote would be a litmus test for their faith troubled them. I believe that all Americans own the flag, that all Americans have a right to believe or not believe whatever they want. Freedom of religion, freedom from hate, freedom of speech, and a deep and abiding patriotism that cuts across party lines. And what we've seen is that the right wing since 1981 has become ever more really fascist. I mean, really trending towards fascism. It's almost an insult to conservatives of earlier eras to say that they're more and more conservative. They've actually become more and more fascist.
Wow. And we've seen when you ran for governor of Maryland, you had a lot of support, including that of Kamala Harris. Wanted to talk to you a little bit about Kamala Harris when you heard that she was the choice for the Democratic vice president. What was your reaction, and have you spoken with her since?
Yeah, I was texting with Kamala the night that she was chosen as vice president. She's a dear, dear friend. We go back about 15 years. And I'm tremendously proud of her. I'm excited about what her candidacy means for Black girls, brown girls across this country, daughters of immigrants. I'm also excited about what the possibilities for our country. Kamala has already been a transformational figure before she was nominated for vice president. I'll give you an example. There's two real movements that come out of her first campaign for DA. The first is the one known as Emerge. Emerge is a network of organizations across this country that train women to run for office and help raise money for them when they do. And it was founded by the donors behind Kamala's first campaign, a group of women who wanted to transform the way that women were seen in American politics. And they had so much success in Kamala's campaign that they and Kamala launched Emerge right after it and built a movement to elect women across this country. The things you have to remember that it wasn't that long ago, specifically it was the year she was first elected to DA, I think it was around 2004. There were only 4 Black elected district attorneys of jurisdictions of more than 200,000 people in the entire country at that time. And there was a similar number of progressives. In other words, some of those Black folks were, fairly law and order conservative candidates, and a couple of them were progressive. And there were a couple of white progressives as well who were DAs. And Kamala has really been the driving force to start the movement that now has a progressive DA in Philadelphia. We've had Black DAs, now a Latino DA in Dallas. All of them since Kamala's first victory, many of them using her playbook. And what Kamala figured out when she first ran for DA, she was running against candidates who were backed by the prison guards union. And she was running as somebody who was a sister, whose sister is a civil rights lawyer, whose parents were civil rights activists, and who ran with those values. She was inspired by a man named Thelton Henderson. Thelton Henderson was the second Black in the U.S. Department of Justice. He was fired for giving Martin Luther King his car when Martin Luther King's car broke down in Alabama. And the Sovereignty Commission famously got a photo of King driving a DOJ car, suggesting that DOJ was somehow moving him around the South, when actually they just wanted to make sure that the Klan or the Sovereignty Commission wouldn't assassinate him that day. And Thelton got to young Kamala and he said to her, it's great to fight the power, was even better is to have the power. And so he convinced her that rather than being a defense attorney or a civil rights lawyer, to become a prosecutor. And so there she was running for DA the first time, and Kamala was an avowed opponent of the death penalty. Didn't think it worked under any circumstances, that it was always racist. It was always targeted towards the poor. It was always fallible. And she becomes DA because she figures out that there's a set of issues that move voters emotionally in the right direction, the same way that the fear stoked by the prison guards unions, the police unions were moving voters in the wrong direction. And then she's tested early, and this is what she really got my respect. I had, early in my career, been a spokesperson for the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty. So I took note of this young Black woman DA of San Francisco, which is a very conservative law enforcement culture, and in a way that a lot of cities, law enforcement is more conservative, if you will, in the politics of the town. And a young Black boy, I mean, he's 19 years old. If he's in your house, he's your boy, he's your child. He's accused of killing a police officer in a very tragic case. Dianne Feinstein herself urges Kamala to seek the death penalty publicly at the officer's memorial. The entire liberal establishment in San Francisco comes down on Kamala, make an exception for when officers are killed. She says, no, opposition to the death penalty is absolute. So, well, you won't have a career. Well, clearly she has. In the process, she's proven to people that you can stick to your values and you can win as prosecutor, because ultimately what the country is hungry for is justice. And people will recognize, as they did with Thurgood Marshall, that lawyers, Howard graduates, Kamala and Thurgood Marshall both, can be great defenders of the people's interest and opponents of the death penalty too, for example.
Yeah, we see and we hear President Trump often say that he's done so much for Black Americans, and obviously many disagree with that. When President Obama was in office, do you think that he did enough? When you watch Trump use his executive powers a lot more than anybody in recent memory, was it a tactic that Obama could have used? If there's a criticism of President Obama, is it that he didn't quite do enough for African Americans?
You know, in many ways, that's a criticism of the office itself. You get a Black president, and you may think for a moment you have a Black king, and what you actually have is a Black president. I think I would lay more blame at the feet of Harry Reid, who refused to restore the Senate to rules where you can pass laws based on a majority, even though it was clear we were in a recession. And as a result, 400 laws, many of them sponsored by CBC members, died in the Senate that had been passed in the House, laws that would have transformed the economic future of the country. I can't imagine what it would be like to be the first Black president of these United States, let alone to be fighting the Tea Party almost the entire time that you're president. But in those first 2 years, when we controlled the House, the Senate, and the presidency, and the recession was deepening before our eyes, we could have done a lot more to narrow the wealth gap between Blacks and whites, between rich and poor in this country. In fact, the laws were passed in the House, and they died in the Senate because Harry Reid did not have the courage to, on the first day of the Senate, restore it to a majority vote. He kept the kind of modern rules of cloture, and in the process hobbled the American people's ability to rebuild their economy in a way that would better benefit the bulk of us.
Yeah, and we're talking with Ben Jealous, of course, the president of the People for the American Way. In terms of criminal justice, there's been some discussion around the differences in funding that prosecutors and DAs receive compared to their public defender counterparts. Would more equitable funding make a difference in your view? Oh my
gosh, yes. We need much better funding of public defenders across this country. We need much better funding of legal services. The promise of a democracy in many ways lives or dies in its courts. And when you deny people the right besides this, when you deny people a defense attorney who has the time to properly investigate and make the case for their defense, you are condemning them to a trial in form, but not in fact. And the U.S. Supreme Court has found previously, this is how we ended up with people having a right to an attorney, that you could not have a trial in form, but not in fact. It's not enough, though, to check the box, is there a lawyer standing next to you? You actually have to give that lawyer sufficient resources to investigate and to put together a defense.
Yeah. And, we've been asking many of our guests. We know that we just recently lost Representative John Lewis. Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on John Lewis, your interaction with John Lewis, and what was that like?
John was always on mission. You get behind the counter, you get behind the curtain at the NAACP National Convention or a Democratic National Convention. And you've had a lot of people who act like they're in a locker room. John, this politician who was trained as clergy, who was mentored by King and Rosa Parks, was always on the battlefield. He was always clear. He was always focused. He always knew the role he needed to play. And in many ways, he was a link. He was a link to the modern generation of protesters from the old generation. You go back to the March on Washington and you ask yourself, was anybody talking about police brutality that day? John Lewis was. And he was the youngest voice there. And he was a link, the clergy of the civil rights movement and the politicians who benefited from opportunities created by it. And he was ultimately a link to God from the U.S. Congress. He was a trained member of the clergy who was very clear that God was on the side of the poor, the oppressed, those who were being discriminated against, and that the Constitution was too. And that the character of the nation, as Frederick Douglass would put it, being us at our best, was as well. I'll miss John. He was like Ted Kennedy. He was one of these guys you could call and talk to, or even the way General Powell is. I talked to him the other day, who have seen so many battles, who have led so consistently that you could spend 3 minutes with them and get greater clarity than you could in 3 hours with most other leaders. To this rising generation of young elected officials who we organize the people for the American way. People often don't know our organization, but they know our work. And we have maintained for 15 years a network of young elected officials. My brother and the great quest to elect more black governors, Andrew Gillum, helped build this over a 17-year period. He was with people for. And this young elected officials network, they have, as a group, volunteered this fall to really continue the work of John Lewis. We were talking to some of them the other day, and they just said, look, if John can't be John right now, then we'll be John Lewis right now. There's people out there who think that the voting rights movement died with him. And we, as the young generation, we have 300 young black elected officials in our network, 300 black young elected officials in our network. They'll stand up this fall, press conferences across this country, framed by a rainbow of 1,000 of their peers who are also young elected officials, and simply say, John Lewis inspired us into public service, and if he isn't here to play the role he has traditionally played, then we will all play it. We will defend the vote. We will defend the black vote, and we will make sure people show up. One of the most urgent things we can do right now is to make sure that black folks 18 to 35 understand their responsibility to vote in this election and then understand how to vote. This whole vote by mail thing is happening suddenly in a lot of places. There's a lot of confusion. The attacks in the post office we talked about earlier contribute to it. And yet, if John Lewis had an abiding message, it was vote no matter what. Voting's hard, vote no matter what. They just made it more expensive for you to vote somewhere because you got to have an ID, vote no matter what. Do whatever you have to do. That was always John's message.
Yeah. And speaking of voting, obviously, that was, like you said, that was Representative Lewis's message. When you talk about voting this November, of course, that we all know presidential election, everyone talks about how important that is. But can you also talk about the fact that the Republicans have continued to stack the deck in terms of federal judges. How important is that?
It's as important as our health care. Trump has appointed 200 federal judges. The Republicans gummed up Obama, making it almost impossible for him to get federal judges through. And there was a backlog, and they took full advantage of it. And the judges that are there 201, all 200 that Trump nominated, are there because they've agreed to destroy the Affordable Care Act. And that should terrify all. But we're in the middle of a global health pandemic. And the president of the United States is being aided and abetted by the Senate, Mitch McConnell, to put judges on the bench who will literally take away health care from tens of millions of Americans.
Yeah, and the long-term effects, been jealous of stacking the deck in the federal courts?
The long-term effects, are a range of issues. Really, a frontal attack on civil rights protections, a return to a more conservative judiciary like that, before the Warren Court of the 1920s and 30s and 40s that was so tolerant back then of tactics like lynch mobs, now of police killings. The absolute obliteration of a woman's right to choose, the obliteration of clean air and clean water standards. You look at a protection that we depend on, whether it's civil rights or environmental or just our basic freedoms, they're all threatened. I think a lot of people, though, to get it, to really feel it, they have to think about something that they have that they may lose that's palpable to them. And for millions of Americans, that'll be their health care. That's what these judges are there for.
Yeah, when we think of Ben Jealous, we think of an activist, of course, right? We see, and I say that to say this, we've seen the athletes of today, more prolifically the NBA players led by LeBron James, boycott or for better word, strike against their postseason play because of the violence, the police brutality, and the shooting of unarmed African Americans. Do you think it might be time for these now very wealthy NBA players maybe to form their own league?
I didn't know that that's where you were headed. I'm all for it. I'm all for workers, getting creative. And there are all sorts of models in our economy that factory workers have used, for instance, to buy the corporation that they work for and manage it. And, I'd be totally supportive of LeBron and his peers taking ownership. I can remember actually being at the NNPA offices when Isaiah Thomas came in and he had just purchased the CBA. I thought that was a brilliant idea then.
Right.
Let me say this about King James. It's like we say about Jesus in the Black church. He may not come when you want him, but he's always right on time. I took note that it was 4 years to the day since Kaepernick started kneeling that all the games were canceled. And it was perfect timing because we are a nation really without a president in the traditional sense. Typically a president in time of strife seeks to heal, seeks to evolve, seeks to unite. That has not been happening. And to see the players who in some ways garner more attention from the nation step up in such a decisive way, white, black, and brown, was tremendously inspiring, and I'm deeply appreciative of that.
Yeah, and we have a few moments left. Do you believe that America has changed so fundamentally that it will never be the same again?
I believe that it's always darkest before the dawn. My grandmother is 103 years old. She'll be 104 this November. She's the granddaughter of slaves. She descends from Thomas Jefferson's grandmother. We know through DNA, through those other grandchildren that were Thomas Jefferson's grandma's slaves. And she carries with her, it's very sharp, 200 years of history told firsthand. The 100 years she's witnessed herself, the 100 years she inherited from her grandparents, all of whom had been slaves. And she would tell you that if you just think about it like physics, every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. That at this time, when we are about to become a nation where every group is a minority, wherever, even white folks. We have to, by the middle of this century, we'll be at a place where every group has to get along with one other group demographically to succeed democratically. That you would expect the most conservative amongst them to act like a fox backed into a corner and lash out. And so that's what we're seeing, is that conservatives like Donald Trump and the Koch brothers know that the clock is running out on them. And they're acting like a fox backed into a corner. And so we just gotta keep on moving, because ultimately, yes, history will change in a way that it cannot change back, and that will be for the better. When we finally get to a place where every group in this country has to cooperate, has to get along demographically with at least one other group to succeed democratically, that'll happen in the next 20 years. And so let's just keep the faith and keep pushing.
And, you know, it's, what, 4 years ago, about this time, Hillary Clinton was running for president against Donald Trump. And about this time, she had what many thought was an insurmountable lead. What must Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, your friend Kamala Harris, do from this point going forward to secure not just the popular vote, because we know Hillary won the popular vote by about 3 million, but the all-important electoral college vote?
We must campaign hard for every vote in every state where the election results could switch. We got to be turning out folks everywhere. But in this moment, you know, you're 9 weeks out, you've really got to focus on the battleground states where it's just not clear. All the campaigning to date has not gotten you to an outcome. And what does that mean? It means that in places like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, not just Florida, you've got to be concerned about the Latino vote. Trump is currently at 40% with Latinos. He should be at 30. There's at least 10 points of Latinos that need to be moved in the right direction. That means that you've got to be advertising in the NNPA's peers, you know, not in the Black media as much as in the Spanish-speaking media, right? And right now, Trump is outspending them 10-1 in that medium. 10-1. When there are massive amounts of Latino swing voters. Absolutely, you know, of course, you've got to be talking to young Black folks, and really not take for granted that you're going to get kind of all of their grandparents, and therefore they're even going to turn out. Like, you've got to make sure that young people understand that this election depends on them. If Trump is reelected, it will likely be because two things happen. One, Biden failed to make the case to Latino swing voters who can flip states from Wisconsin to Florida. And two, young people failed to really internalize for themselves that they were the key, that they were the decision makers. It's so easy when you're young to feel overwhelmed or irrelevant. And they've got to really understand, and we have to make sure. What we're doing to help people for the American way, we are advertising specifically to Latino swing voters. It's the only advertising we do because nobody else is doing it, and it's scary right now. And the other thing that we're doing is we're reaching out to Black voters 18 to 35, peer-to-peer texting. That's being led by our young elected officials to make sure that they understand how to vote by mail and that they must.
Ben Jealous, the president of the People for the American Way. It's a pleasure talking with you. We really appreciate you coming on today. Wish we had more time. There's so much more we could talk about, but thank you so much. And everybody, thank you for watching. Stay safe and stay well. We'll see you tomorrow.
Appreciate you, Brother Brad.